Hello friends, welcome back again. Today we are going to discuss about port security of the switches and IEEE standard 802.1x. In today's world, there is a challenge that we have to maintain the security of the switches and the ports that are running on it. We have all these different ports on the device where anybody can connect to the port and will have access to the internal resources of your organization. Because of it, there is a type of security that comes into picture called network access control NAC. Sometimes it is referred as port-based access control. There is a standard technology called IEEE 802.1x. The idea is that before you allow access to the network through switch port, you first have to authenticate using your credentials. So no one can directly walk into your network. It uses technology called EAP and Radius. EAP stands for Extensible Authentication Protocol. It is a standard way to authenticate on your network. And Radius is a way to store and communicate authentication details like your credentials. Radius stands for Remote Authentication Dialing User Service. It applies authorization policy to provide specific privileges to the specific user depending on the policy applied. As we are talking about the port-based access control, just to clarify, we are talking about the physical ports of the switches, not about TCP and UDP ports. Network access control using IEEE 802.1x is used to configure the port-based authentication. It is a combination of AAA authentication and port security. It includes three major components like supplicant, authenticator, and authentication server. We will see the function of all these three one by one. The first is a supplicant. The supplicant or an agent, it is an agent or a service running on the device that requests access to the network. It responds to the requests which are coming from the switches. The second one is an authenticator. This is a this controls the physical access to the network based on the authentication status of the client. This device acts as a proxy between client and the authentication server. It requests identity information from the client and verifies that information with the authentication server and relays the authentication server's response to the client. The authenticator includes Radius client functionality, which is responsible for encapsulating and decapsulating the extensible authentication protocol frames, that is EAP frames, and interacting with the authentication servers. The most common authenticators are LAN switches and WLC, wireless controllers. The third major component is authentication servers. This performs the actual authentication of the client. The authentication server validates the identity of the client and notifies the switch if the client is authorized to access the network or not. All the authentication policies and authorization policies are written on the authentication server. So depending on the access level of the user, the specific policy is applied. Now, how it works? Supplicant initiates the authentication process. It sends the EAPOL frame to the authenticator, that is Extensible Authentication Protocol over LAN frame, to the authenticator, that is switch. The authenticator initiates the communication when link state changes from down to up. The port remains in unauthorized mode during the authentication process. The authenticator sends an EAP request or the identity frame to client and asks for its identity or the credentials. Once that request comes to the supplicant responds with an EAP response which contains the credential. It is referred as an identity frame. When the supplicant provides its identity, the authenticator begins its role as a proxy between supplicant and authentication server, and it passes the EAP frames between supplicant and authentication server until authentication succeeds or fails. If authentication succeeds, the authenticator port is authorized. Then user can access the required access to the network. So the specific exchange of the EAP frames depends on the authentication method that is used. You can see in the diagram the message exchange that is being initiated by the supplicant and the response coming from the authentication server. It is a little bit complex process, but it ensures that the only people who are allowed on the network will have access to the networks. In this way, we can use 802.1x protocols and the standards to maintain the security on the switch. Thank you for watching the video. For more videos, you can subscribe to my channel, that is Network Talks. Thanks.